Johnny!
I'll be back.
And you will know my name is the Lord!
I'm walking here! I'm walking here!
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that. Groovy.
That was not the Dungeon City movie that I was expecting.
Amazing trailer, though.
And it has one of the better B-movie villains I've ever seen. Played by Richard Mole.
What's that character's name?
Something stupid.
But anyway.
Can this be the opening to Box Office Pulp with no explanation?
Yeah.
Box Office Pulp. Who needs an explanation? I didn't write anything up. Like normal. If you're listening to this and confused, boy, do I feel bad for you. Just like Captain America, which is now in its 12th entry. If you didn't watch the previous ones, you're going to be so fucking lost. This is how we're tackling Box Office Pulp. If you don't know all the conversations that happen when the recorders aren't on, too bad. And if that doesn't scare away our audience, nothing will. So welcome, you Remainers, to Box Office Pulp. I'm your host, Cody. Joining me today, I didn't think of any clever names. So we've got James. Say hello, James. Hey, MB.
I wanted a clever name.
The Winter MB? Nah.
I'll accept it.
Hey! Alright, that was shit, but thank you. And Mike.
Hi.
Hi, Mike. Well, that might be our shittiest show I've ever done, but I'm standing by it. So we're jumping right in today, folks, to Marvel's newest film, unless, like, this comes out in years or something.
I just want to say, Cody had a month to prepare an intro.
I did, but you guys delayed me, so all my topical humor didn't make sense anymore. Now I gotta deal with, like, gorillas getting shot in shoes. That's true. I was mostly gone for a week, so we couldn't record.
Yeah, what the hell?
So what topical humor were you going to bring into it that's out of date a week later?
I don't know. I threw out the sheet because it didn't make sense anymore.
What was on the sheet?
I was reading through it. I'm like, what is this? I don't even know. There was a sheet. I was prepared last time we were going to record.
What, Cody? Are you sure you weren't just drunk and that's why it didn't make any sense when you read it as a sober person?
No, like I was sitting down typing stuff out and then Facebook message saying, bloop, oh, no, we're not recording. I'm like, well, never mind. No more work. And I deleted what I had.
You didn't have to delete it. You're going to record again.
Eventually.
Well, I mean, the names would have made sense still, but...
Yeah, that's the entire point. That's what an intro to Box Office Pulp is. Wacky fucking names, but vaguely having to do with the topic at hand.
We got the Winter MB.
Whoa, good. This is Mike Napier.
So fucking happy right now. I hate this fucking show and everything it stands for. This show is evil.
This show.
Actually, I might have the intro saved. Let me go through my garbage.
Report of December 16th, 1991.
Oh, what? Oh, okay. So I deleted everything out of my intro document and then apparently saved the blank page. For a second, I got excited. I'm like, oh, I do have the intro. No, I do not. I do not.
Jesus.
I do not have the intro. And I couldn't make one today because I was in the middle of making soup. I had priorities, all right? But we're not here to talk about soup or blank pieces of paper taking up space on my hard drive. None of that. That's not important. We're here to talk about Captain America.
Someone is recording, right?
God. Oh, God, please tell me yes.
I'm recording.
I'm recording. Don't scare me like that.
Oh, no, we would lose that amazing introduction.
I'm liking this intro the more it goes on, honestly. This is some good stuff.
Yeah, I know you do.
Delve into it. It's like if you make a pie. Sometimes you gotta let it set up for a little bit, or otherwise it's too gooey, it's too mushy. You know, you just gotta
Why don't you move on to the episode at hand?
So, Civil War. What are we on, the 12th entry? 13th entry?
I believe it's the 12th, yeah.
12th entry. Goddamn, can you believe we're that far along in the Marvel film series?
Nearly 10 years.
That does not seem real.
And to think, you'd almost expect it to have petered out at a certain point to kind of collapse under its own weight, but instead, I feel like Captain America Civil War is one of the strongest entries in the series. I don't know if you guys agree with that. I have no idea what your opinions are. But...
I absolutely agree. I think it's one of the strongest entries into the superhero movie genre.
It had heart, action, great characters, all sorts of little fun bits. It was funny, sad, moving, everything I want in a movie just jammed together, plus Ant-Man. Spoilers.
Yeah, I would easily put it shoulder to shoulder with Guardians of the Galaxy and Winter Soldier as far as Marvel's best.
Oh yeah, it's the cream of the crop.
I like the balls on Marvel too, because they basically announced, oh, Batman vs. Superman's coming out on this date? Nah, we're coming out on that date. What are you gonna do? They played chicken for that spot, that weekend role. And God, just imagine if they both opened like on that same weekend, if DC had just planted their feet. God, what a both films probably would have suffered financially, but if the direct comparison that weekend would have been clearly in Captain America's favor. People would have walked out of one movie and just like jumped off a bridge or directly into Captain America.
God, so many dejected fans walking into Chris Evans's arms. Oh,
His
can I stay here
sexy
forever?
helicopter stopping arms.
I think that was the first thing my group commented on when we were leaving the theater, actually. Just that super, I don't know if it's necessary, but it was hypnotic. That is a buff man. That is a well-sculpted man.
Chris Evans, I don't know, like, I've seen a lot of actors take on a character and, like, really embody it. You know, Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. But Chris Evans, I don't know how he keeps doing it, but he keeps escalating this character. Like, to be able to take a character like Captain America and continually build on what is essentially, by the numbers, a one-note character, and keep adding layers and depths and interesting, like, tweaks to, even after all these movies, like, that takes some serious skill, especially when this is the guy that the movie has to base itself around.
It's even weirder because it's Captain America. Like, it's totally tied into nationalism. Like, it's very ooh, rah, rah kind of thing. And somehow they've managed to make this into a multi-nation blockbuster where people in, I don't know if China actually got the movie, I'm assuming they did, but people, you know, in like Japan or something can go and really enjoy this movie.
Well,
When they first made Captain America, I figured like, great, that'll make $200 million in America and then $0 in Russia and it'll be done. And somehow it's just a huge franchise now. This one's going to make $1 billion. It's huge. I can't believe that they found a way to make Captain America successful to everyone.
Well, not only did they make it successful, they managed to do something that was completely unheard of, which is do the 3 trilogy movie for superheroes, and the first one that's actually, like, good all the way through. First Avenger, Winter Soldier, Civil War.
They did the hat trick.
Captain America. Like, Captain America was the one that broke the mold for everyone, and I can't believe that was the thing. Like, it fits, and I like that, but I just can't believe that that was the one out of all of Marvel's prestigious ones. Like, you would think Iron Man would have broke it first, or even Thor to some degree, but Captain America was the one that resonated the most.
Captain America, that character no one thought they could do right once. I'm still amazed we got a good Captain America movie. Not like 3 is just, I can't wrap my head around it.
And like most movies, normally they kind of peak at some point, and the third one just, it wraps it up. This one's like, no, fuck it. It's just going to keep getting better. They're going to come back for a 4th.
Arguably, this one, like, does more with the franchise than the previous 2 ever did. And I'm not talking of part, like, Captain America. I'm talking, like, Marvel as a whole. Because this is essentially a Marvel Universe movie. It's not an Avengers. Like, people were really worried going into this that it was going to be an Avengers sequel, a Captain America sequel in name only that was posing as a new Avengers movie, but it ends up being more of an escalation of basically everything that's been built up so far. And it's really like, I said this during the first, like, the Avengers, but this, I think, more than any other comic book movie, is essentially what you get when you open up a comic, look at the screen, and you're looking at the exact same thing. Like, it's just exactly what, it captures everything about the tone, everything about the action, everything about the spectacle. Everything is so true to what a Marvel Comics event should be.
And since we're talking about Civil War, it's actually better than if you opened up a comic.
That's,
Ew.
I mean, and that's not even really saying much, because Civil War was just so universally panned. Like, the idea of even tackling it as a movie.
That
like,
was controversial when that was first announced. It's like, well, so much for Captain America 3.
Mike, didn't you and I, like, essentially say, like, oh God, like, please no?
It was the double whammy of Iron Man is going to be a huge part in this movie, and it's Civil War. It's like, what? What does that have to do with Winter Soldier?
Especially considering the way Winter Soldier set up the ending, where it was clearly going to be, like, the third movie was going to be the search for Bucky. And we get that in this one, but we get it in a way different way than we would have ever expected.
Well, Marcus and McFeely took the very brilliant approach to adapting Civil War, which is they didn't adapt Civil War in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
So they took the bare skeleton of that stupid comic and actually made a civil war between 2 groups of superheroes something I want to see, which is very impressive because nobody is more exhausted from seeing superheroes punch each other in the face more than me. So the fact that not only did I actually want to see all of this happen, but that I walked out of that theater with a gigantic smile on my face is really saying
I'm glad
something.
you said smile. I thought it was going to be gigantic something else.
Woohoo.
There's that.
Well, Anthony Mackie.
Woohoo. Really kill momentum on things. I'm going to bring it back around to the trilogy idea. I'm really impressed with Civil War because it manages to do, it almost gives the movies themselves an arc. Not just the characters within them, but the tones of the films and what they're after and what they're doing. If you look at the first Captain America movie, it's a period piece. It's Captain America fighting the Red Skull, traditional big bad that he can go fist to fist with, and who is clearly evil. There is pretty much zero redeeming facets to the Red Skull. He's a red-skinned, skull-faced Nazi. Pretty evil. By the time we get to Civil War, all of a sudden the bad guys are a lack of compromise, and the true villain of the piece is basically just a human who wants to psychologically fuck with the Avengers. So instead of coming down to a fist fight, it's a battle of wits. Everything is murkier grays. The closest we get to a pure bad guy is Crossbones, and he's killed in the first couple scenes. So it's really a huge switch from where we started in the first movie. And I have to give so much credit to the Russos for managing to transform the series and get to this endpoint and make this feel natural. It doesn't need a big bad that they got to fight with their fists to make work. They can play with the kind of shadowy interplay with all these characters and just how point of view can make someone a villain, not necessarily that they're an evil Nazi who runs a concentration camp.
Yeah, how gray the series got as it went on is how Captain America should be more or less played in general than how he's been the last, 20 years, besides the Brubaker run.
One thing I found kind of interesting, and it's entirely possible this isn't intentional, but whenever I look at the arc of the Captain America movies, I kind of see them as a metaphor for the arc of American conflict. So you have First Avenger, which is very clearly a good versus evil World War II movie. Cap punching Nazis. Then you look at Winter Soldier, and with this shadowy, all-encompassing organization that may or may not have its tentacles in anything, you can very easily see that as a kind of a metaphor for the fear of communism, especially with all of the paranoia on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s part as seen in that movie. Only in this instance, it actually turns out to be justified, and you could kind of see a little bit of a connection to current events with Zemo and his entire motivation being he wants revenge for what was essentially a gigantic superhero drone strike, considering the fact that Ultron is just a drone metaphor. So the story of Captain America in many ways is the story of America. And even if that wasn't necessarily intentional, that is something that you can pull from that I think gives these movies a tremendous amount of depth just beneath the surface.
My whole thing with it is not necessarily the evolution of American conflict, necessarily as the idea of American or patriotic disillusion, where, okay, you have Steve Rogers in the first Avenger. You have him, unequivocally putting his life on the line for his country because he feels it's his duty and nothing else. Like the definition of patriotism. And he goes out and he does it and he becomes the, pinnacle of superhuman at the time and manages to rally together against the forces of Hydra and do all this amazing stuff. And then he gets frozen in ice, wakes up, and he does the same thing in Winter Soldier. He goes for it. He becomes the, basically the modern equivalent of what he was in World War II. The problem is that he doesn't realize, and it takes that entire movie for him to realize that the world and the government that he looked up to, the flag that he essentially put on as a shield, both figuratively and literally, is innately corrupt. And he sees, by the end of it, that, no, we've got to tear it all down. We have basically got to restructure things so that we can reach a goal that is more aligned with what the ideal is. It's actually said the best in Daredevil Born Again. Captain America has a scene in that where he says he's loyal to nothing except the dream. And that's always rung true to me. And the character goes through that progression throughout the trilogy where in Civil War, Cap really has no affiliation with the government whatsoever, and he's kind of become a renegade agent where he's just working with the Avengers. He's trying to be the best superhero that he can, embodying all this while putting it on his own shoulders instead of relying on a country to back him up. And when that backfires, the country turns their back on him and says, okay, you've got to sign this and you've got to be a part of our program. And Steve is basically justified for everything that he went through in Winter Soldier. He discovers that, okay, these guys are actually, like, Hydra wasn't the end of it. This is a much bigger problem, and I don't know how to tackle it alone. And the problem with that is that everybody is in conflict. So Steve sees the fallout of his own disillusionment across the series. Like, he sees what his choices essentially boil down to, and it's not pretty. Like, actually, Steve makes a lot of mistakes in this movie, I think. Like, he makes a lot of mistakes in that he's so disillusioned with the idea of governmental control that he makes some pretty drastic leaps in logic that the movie is clearly telling us is leaps in logic, but you also know where he's coming from because you have this history of he was the patriotic soldier and then he became the weapon that was being spearheaded by the organization that he thought he was going to destroy. Like, it's all this mind-bending moral conflict that goes within this trilogy that I've never seen storytelling on a level like that in any superhero franchise.
Yeah, it's very much a complete story with a very visible through line, which is rare in these movies. And to tag up on that, I feel like this third entry is also a brilliant, I wouldn't say deconstruction, but it's an interesting examination on a theme that was so prevalent for the first two movies, which is that Steve Rogers doesn't need to change. The world needs to change around Steve Rogers. He doesn't have to live up to anybody's standards. People need to live up to his standards. The first movie is all about everyone learning to believe that Steve really is the real deal. He actually is Captain America. The second movie is Captain America realizing that the world isn't living up to him, that the things he thought the people around him stood for aren't what he thought, that, like you said, the very enemy he thought he was fighting was secretly pulling his strings, and him just tearing that all down. And the third movie is essentially looking at that under a microscope and saying, maybe Cap not compromising isn't such a good thing. Like, maybe that thing we've all been rooting for, that the world needs to meet up to Cap's standards, is actually really dangerous whenever it's unchecked.
Yeah.
It's like maybe Cap needs to take it down a notch and actually learn to compromise and let the world change him for once.
No, never.
And what's interesting is that you throw the big emotional wrench in there. Like, you had First Avenger brilliantly establish his relationship with both Peggy Carter and Bucky. And in this movie, Peggy Carter dies. And Chris Evans actually put this very eloquently and very brilliantly, where he was talking about the arc of Cap and the arc of Steve and how they kind of intertwined. And Peggy was his world back in the 40s. You know, she was everything to him besides the war. And when she literally dies of old age and he's still just as young as he's ever been, all he has left is this fugitive renegade that everyone is saying, okay, that dude literally may have, like, nearly started a war. We've got to bring him in. You've got to be the one to bring him in, and we've got to have your okay. Not even your okay. We've got to have your word that you will actually help us bring him in. And it's this amazing moral gray area where Captain America has to sit there and say to himself, do I want to do the right thing, or do I want to do the thing that I want, that I need, that, like, the thing that is going to keep me sane? Because the thing I thought I had left is gone now, and Bucky is all I have left. Like,
I'm sorry. All I can imagine is Tumblr listening to that speech and just swooning.
oh yeah, this is such an insanely meme-friendly movie.
Oh, it's borderline homoerotic.
Oh,
It is.
Cap and Bucky just staring into each other's eyes in that elevator.
They literally fly off into the sunset at one point, but it's not the end of the movie. That's just like a portion that basically got fangirls.
Now they're shacked up in Wakanda. With their sugar daddy Black Panther. It's okay.
now-
You will be safe here to live however you wish. We are very advanced. We are very socially conscious here in Wakanda.
I'm glad that was not turned into a pimp joke. That was a nice surprise.
No.
Wow. No one's mind went there, Cody.
Mine did. Not that it should have.
Edit point.
No, that's going in. People know I'm just a bad person.
Good.
Good. For the record, I said I was glad that did not turn into a pimp joke. That's progressive.
I'm not racist. I'm glad that you're all not racist. Let's all join hands now.
Yes, I'm glad you understand. If I can backtrack a little bit past me making awkward comments. Earlier, someone mentioned the fact of letting Cap be changed by his world. And I think that's something we actually do have demonstrated very early on in the movie. The infamous "No, you move" speech, which obviously in the comic books Cap delivers himself, has been reassigned to Sharon Carter, read at, Peggy's funeral, which I think is just an absolutely brilliant move because, one, I really always loved that speech. It's a great speech, but coming from Captain America's mouth, it's slightly problematic where it seems like something a fascist would say, like, "No, I'm always right. You get out of my way." But coming from someone who isn't necessarily in a position of power, someone like Sharon Carter, it has a lot more strength to it because you might recognize that the entire world is against you and you're a minority, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. And if you truly believe what you're doing is right, you shouldn't just abandon your principles. And I love them throwing that at the funeral because you get to see Cap reflect on the speech and have it take meaning for him and kind of reaffirm a lot of his thoughts on the Accords. We kind of get the mirror of that later on when Tony Stark is sitting there talking to Peter Parker. Except for I don't know if he actually absorbed that information or acted on it right away. There's the part where Peter tells him, if you're the little guy, you got to stand up, you got to make a difference. And Tony kind of paraphrases it and then recruits a child to go out and then go fight people in an airport where he could possibly die. And I love the way that kind of creates a foil between Tony Stark and Rogers. So you get that these guys aren't necessarily complete opposites, not one's evil, one's good, but both men are kind of flawed, trying to figure out where they should be on this position and how they react to the people around them, how they let the world shape them.
That's what I love so much about this movie, which is it could have been so easy to just make Iron Man the bad guy, but instead there's not really even Zemo, who is technically the villain of the film, isn't really a comic book villain. He's just a sad dude trying to technically tell them the truth and going through horrible means to do it.
So, yesterday I went to go see the new X-Men movie. Spoilers. By the end of the movie, we just forgive Magneto. He's a good guy again. Like, throughout the film, he murders countless people, destroys whole cities, murders every human he can get his hands on. But then you go, oh yeah, whatever, it's fine. It's just very strange how some movies treat that as perfectly acceptable, whereas Zemo is still the bad guy. And you recognize he did bad, but you can sympathize with him. It's not like they're trying to turn... I guess I'm trying to say is, if this were an X-Men film, he'd be the Magneto. He'd be the character you're supposed to cheer for. Like, oh, he did the right thing. He murdered those bad people that destroyed his family. Obviously, we know that's not the case. And earlier in the film, they tell us he was part of a death squad before, his whole family got murdered. So probably not a good guy. But he's not an out-and-out Red Skull kind of villain. He's a guy with very personal motives. And you kind of feel bad for him. Like, his whole family's dead now because the Avengers fucked up and made Ultron and didn't do a good job containing that.
And that's actually something that I kind of want to lead into, which is the idea of the Avengers made Ultron. Like, the Avengers were responsible for all this. And one of the big things that I found both really interesting and kind of a flaw of the movie was that the big thing that nobody ever brings up is the idea that every single, well, not every single one, because I guess technically the attack on New York was perpetrated by Loki, so you can kind of tie that with Thor. But basically the Avengers' failings boil down to Ultron. And who made Ultron? Tony.
Hey, he said, my bad, that one time.
But Tony is the one that is the biggest proponent. Like, he's thrust into the position of, okay, we've got to sign with this. We got to roll along with this because if we don't, they're going to take us out. And do you really want that? And it's so, like, I was worried that it would kind of go in a direction to where Tony would just be acting wildly out of character. But the entire thing is an ego trip. Like, it's still within the bounds of the Tony Stark character that's been built up throughout these films. It's just that Tony is really, really let off scot-free for a lot of the things that, like, essentially what I'm saying is that the Accords really should have been invented to reel Iron Man in before they should have been, used to reel in the Avengers.
Well, I think that's one of the big points of the movie, actually. It's, the split isn't necessarily the Accords, it's how Captain America and Iron Man face responsibility. Captain America essentially says, hey, if I fuck up, I know I fucked up, and I'm accountable to myself. I need to hold myself accountable, I need to be responsible for my actions. Which is why he doesn't end up making things like Ultron. Whereas Tony Stark is habitually a character who just doesn't take blame, or if he screws up, just figures, I can get around it, or I can fix it, or it's not a big deal, or it's someone else's fault.
Tony needs a parent.
Pretty much. Even in Age of Ultron, you know what his solution to making Ultron is? Making Ultron again. He creates the Vision. He just does the same exact thing, and it just happens to work out right the second time. This is a guy.
Thor came in.
Right, yeah, so he got lucky there. So this is a guy who doesn't want to face his responsibilities and admit he was wrong. And the Accords is a way for him to basically say, hey, if something bad happens in the future, we were sanctioned by this other group. They're responsible for us. They're the parent group. We're just the tools. And Captain America's position, a lot of people classify it as emotional. Like, Tony's the logical position and Captain America is the emotional one because he's acting out for Bucky. And I think it might be a little bit different. They're both obviously emotional. Iron Man's is, he really takes that stance after he's given the photograph of the, I don't remember the character's name, but the child who died in Sokovia. Stevie. Poor dead Stevie. We'll go with that. Sounds like a good name. Once he sees the picture of poor dead Stevie, that's what convinces him, like, oh, I fucked up. Notice he doesn't say, I dropped the building on him. He says, we dropped the building on him, even though Ultron was pretty much 100% his doing with a little bit of help from Banner. So Tony never wants to take responsibility for any of this shit. That's why he needs the Accords. And he actually does. Like, he definitely does need that supervision. Whereas Captain America doesn't. And this shouldn't be on him in any case. But Tony's ego basically says, hey, if I gotta deal with it, you gotta deal with it. You can't be trusted either. Because Tony knows what Tony's like. But he doesn't 100% understand what Captain America's like.
Well, it's like he said in Age of Ultron. He doesn't trust a guy with a dark side. And Cap's response is, well, let's just say you haven't seen it yet. Like, that's not exactly a trustworthy notion. Like, even to a guy like Tony Stark, like, you have to eventually look at that and say, wait, what? Like, the idea of a rogue Captain America is something that I think Tony has kind of grappled with in the past. I think he's kind of always prepared himself for the moment he has to face Steve, but he also desperately wants him to be on his side for once, because they've never really been friends. Like, regardless of what that trailer said, they've never really been two guys that are on the same side. They've been guys who have conveniently, like, put aside their differences to save the world, but this conflict was always inevitable, and Tony...
They got shawarma together once.
They all got shawarma. Even Banner got shawarma.
Are you saying no one's friends with Banner?
Yes.
Is that why he's not in the movie? He was just, like, so lonely.
He's floating out in space right now.
Damn you, Space Goldblum.
But, like, the idea of Tony siding with the government, I found so fascinating just because, like, this was the guy
who...
who...
180 from the first Iron Man.
The first Iron Man, the second Iron Man especially, because that was where he essentially went and said, like, to the Senate, like, I gave these ass clowns all the leeway they wanted, and they still want my suit. Like, screw them. And it ends with him literally making them pin a medal to him to satiate his ego. So this is a guy who has grown so egomaniacal that whenever the government essentially agrees to his terms, he's immediately jumping on that, like saying, okay, this is the right thing to do, this is the thing we need to do. But that also doesn't make him a villain, because there's still an argument there to be made. Like, there's still an idea of accountability that, despite all of Tony's flaws, is actually very brilliantly brought up by General Ross, which is like, okay, if I lost two insanely powerful weapons of mass destruction like Thor and the Hulk, you damn well know my ass would be on the line.
But the other thing, too, is I kind of side with Cap on that, because that's reducing essentially really strong people into just being weapons. Like, Thor is technically an alien visitor. He should be able to do whatever the fuck he wants. He's like a diplomat. So why should they know where he is constantly? And Banner? He was off by himself having a peaceful, nice life until the government found him and forced him into action. So they're constantly screwing with his life, which is something Tony ends up doing and mirroring when he captures Wanda and just, he puts her in a nicer spot. It's not a prison cell or anything, but he's trying to hold her captive and control people, which is one of the reasons why I couldn't really be on Team Cap.
Guys, this is going to lead to the Box Office Pulp Civil War.
Get your dukes up.
I didn't realize I would be the guy on the opposite side.
Oh, God.
You were my co-host, Flexu.
Then I'm just Zemo. I just want to see this podcast.
Trying to eat a bullet on the side.
Black Panther still stops me. That's completely unchanged.
Can we just talk about the fact that, we talked about, the main struggle between, Team Cap, Team Iron Man, Captain America, Steve Rogers, Tony Stark, but the side characters, the amount that the side characters add to this movie is insurmountable because there's so many elements in play and in check, and that's what keeps the plot moving at such an interesting direction because there's so many times where these characters don't know what the right thing is and they choose one side and then they realize they screwed up and then they choose another side. It's a prime example of heroes when they're essentially forced to make the hardest decision of their lives. And a lot of them come out drastically different than they came in, like Black Panther. I mean, his whole thing throughout the entire movie is getting vengeance for his father. And he goes to the ends of the earth tracking down Bucky, trying to kill him for killing his father, and takes on the role of King, takes on the role of the Black Panther in order to carry out this mission. And at the end of it, he doesn't want to kill Zemo whenever he discovers that he's the one that actually orchestrated the murder of his father. He's the one that has this 180 where he realizes that killing will not bring about true and actual justice. And it's so interesting to see that arc carry through, especially considering that Black Panther is an entirely new character in the MCU. So I was really impressed by how that character was done, especially Chadwick Boseman's performance, which was just awesome. His voice whenever he's in the suit and he's at the airport scene and he's speaking angrily, barking out the stuff that is passionate and driven by vengeance. That's the type of stuff that I hear in my head whenever I read Black Panther in the comics, is just this serene soul that has this vengeful side. And Boseman brought that out in spades. He was perfect for it.
But even besides the new characters that are introduced, the fact that they didn't leave the old characters on the wayside, we arguably get War Machine doing more than he's done in pretty much any of his movies.
More than the Iron Man movies, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, and the Vision. Vision's one of my personal favorites, so any time they spend with him is fantastic.
Vision just being you.
He has introduced cooking at one point.
Vision can literally do no wrong. That's the thing, is you can literally have Paul Bettany doing anything in that makeup and it's gold.
And hilarious. The Vision doing literally anything is hilarious.
Trying to cook, trying to wear formal wear, it's
trying
great.
to love.
Hypothesizing on the morality of good and evil, as he does whenever he's faced with the Accords. I love his little moment of just a soliloquy that he's spouting off to these people, and they're just what he said.
Shut up.
I'm pretty sure he stole that from the end of Batman Begins. But I just love that, the fact that even, because it could have been so easy to just write the Vision off as just basically being there to shoot laser beams when convenient, but to give that kind of love angle to him and Wanda.
That love to the big lug.
Aw, but make it even a little deeper, where he's talking about how he wants the world to see her as he sees her and not be afraid of her. You could take it as he's desperate to make her accepted because he wants to be accepted. He's trying to live vicariously through her, which he knows never would really work because he's this weird red-skinned half-man, half-robot. But at least if he can make this cosmically powered person accepted, maybe there's a little bit of hope for him, which is great. I mean, for a character who only gets a couple of scenes and a handful of lines, really, that's an amazing amount of work to really put in character-wise. And I love the part at the end where Tony basically accuses him of hey, you fucked up, what happened? And he admits, I got distracted. And Tony just leaves him with that cold, I didn't know that was possible. Because it leaves even more growth for the character in the future. It just plants that seed of doubt. We're not done with him yet. He hasn't figured anything out, but he's in a very different spot than where he started.
It's amazing how this movie gives more of a character arc to its minor supporting characters that most movies give to main characters.
For sure.
I'm amazed at how they were able to take Scarlet Witch from a character I don't think anybody really cared that much about in Age of Ultron to like kind of making her really feel like as close to comic book Scarlet Witch as you could possibly get.
I actually freaking, loved Age of Ultron Scarlet Witch, and I have to say, this is, a million times better.
Well, I feel like the writers honed in on something that's very easy to overlook, which is that if you remove the fact that Scarlet Witch is a mutant, you gut about 90% of what that character is. So I'm so glad that they just used the genetic engineering thing to just be a stand-in for the mutant paranoia and just made that the focus of her character again, facing a world which hates and or fears her.
It was so cool how they were able to work that in, copyright free.
And also, it's just kind of it's amazing that really at the end of the day, that almost makes her scarier as a character because she's this completely unknown element in a world where the Hulk exists. She has chaos magic and can do all this weird stuff that even she doesn't really understand all that much. And I actually would fear her if she were in the real world because it's weirdly a interesting parallel of Jean Grey, how she usually is in the Marvel Universe, where Jean is always built up as so insanely powerful that even Charles Xavier cannot tame her. Nothing can tame her. She's this beast of unstoppable force, and, she's the Phoenix. And Scarlet Witch being that is brilliant because in this version of the Marvel Universe, it's of course she would be. The chick who in the comics said no more mutants, and boom, there were no more mutants, is there, and she's standing next to the Avengers, and one tiny slip up, and she could endanger them all. She could, she was powerful enough to take down the Vision. She was powerful enough to, render him asunder and, completely own him, which was just untold, considering that in Age of Ultron, he was so insanely powerful.
She brought him to his knees, but not for the first time. Cunnilingus. But I am curious as to where this leaves Scarlet Witch, because it seems like they're really playing up an arc of her trying to become more comfortable in her identity. Basically, they seem to be playing one long superhero origin arc for her, and I'm very curious as to how that's going to play out with Infinity War, especially with them very deliberately building up to the fact that she is potentially the most powerful figure in these movies. I really enjoy seeing Scarlet Witch being given that kind of attention since she's kind of the unsung heroine of the mainstream Marvel universe.
Yeah, Wanda has a really long history of kind of being on the back matter of a lot of Avengers stories or a lot of X-Men stories. She's just kind of there for most of them, and it's not because of the character's fault, it's just because of how she's used.
Well, the problem with Scarlet Witch is she's arguably too powerful, and B, no one really knows what those powers are. So most writers are immediately intimidated out of just not writing her.
That's kind of the problem with the new X-Men movie.
One Marvel Universe at a time.
Sorry, okay. Positive things to say. Hawkeye. For so long.
No one has ever said that, Cody. No one has ever said that.
I'm breaking new ground. Hawkeye. Positive things. They've been trying for so many movies to make Hawkeye have a personality and just not doing a good job. They gave him a family and lots of screen time in the last Avengers, and everyone's still so what's the Arrow dude like? And I feel like in this movie they took a much larger step in that direction. He's not quite there where I could fully describe what the character is like in his off time or what drives him, but I feel like I have a better understanding of him, and they did give him some little moments to shine. I particularly loved how when they're in the raft, he goes on his little rant about Tony Stark being an asshole, calling him, the futurist and all that kind of stuff. I enjoyed that. That was great. He kind of got a moment to shine where he just didn't have to be Arrow guy.
Well, what they did was they decided, okay, this time we're going to make Hawkeye.
And not Ultimate Hawkeye.
And that helped a lot.
And what's weird is that this version of Hawkeye feels the most like Jeremy Renner than the other Jeremy Renner performances of Hawkeye.
It is weird.
The Russos found a way, after so many goddamn movies, they found a way for Jeremy Renner to channel his inner Jeremy Renner and actually produce what we envisioned when we imagined him as Hawkeye. And it's great. Like, I love every single scene he's in, because in that airport sequence, he is just kicking ass left and right, and he's doing it with some of the best lines. Like, he's doing such a great job of standing out, even though, you know, you have Spider-Man, you have Black Panther, you have Giant Man, you have Captain America, Iron Man, and War Machine. He still manages to carve out a little niche for himself in this.
I'm just amazed that Joss Whedon, who is very well known for making interesting and memorable characters, couldn't even get this guy right. Like, think back to the first Avengers, where he just wrote him as the weirdo hanging out in the corner, and he gets possessed because it's easier to write a possessed guy.
Yeah, he's been the character everyone's just kind of thrown up their hands on, said, okay, I'm throwing him under the bus so I can spend time writing other characters.
He shoots arrows, fuck it, move on.
What's the problem of having him share the same space with Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark? Because, let's face it, Tony Stark in these movies essentially took up Clint's role in the comics.
It's kind of weird, like, having to navigate those two characters with such similar energies. I think they kind of overshot trying to avoid that by just going the opposite direction way too far. Them just being blank.
Blank, and then, like, slowly, like, tiny bit of development in Age of Ultron, but not enough to where you're like, okay, this is the character that we need to follow. Like, it still had some growing to do. And this, it was like, oh, okay, this is what we wanted.
I even gave him better costume, finally.
He's finally purple.
I like how the Russos apparently just know how to balance characters more, and one of the big things I love that they do is they balance characters against each other to help define the character. You know, Black Widow feels way more defined after the Winter Soldier because she had all that time to bounce off of Steve and to see how their two personalities kind of clashed and how they mixed. And it just did a great job defining both of those characters. In this movie, you know, that's extended way out because we have so many more characters to play with. But you get things like Anthony Mackie and Sebastian Shaw, just like those two characters thrown together and how much they kind of have a love-hate relationship going on. Just like how every time one of them does something, the other one is just fucking there rolling his eyes like this asshole over here.
They have
awesome.
They have a rivalry over who is Captain America's best friend.
Pretty much, yeah. It's interesting, and I feel like that's great. Plus, they did the callback of the Falcon and Ant-Man.
Oh, that was great. Yeah.
Tick-tack's big now. Just, I love the fact that they kind of got over the fact that Ant-Man kicked his ass the first time, and now he's kind of got a grudging respect for him, almost a friendship. That's demonstrated very briefly. They don't interact all that much at all, but just enough for you to get an idea of that, how these characters are and how they really mesh their chemistry. It's a great sign for Infinity War, because that's going to have about 6,000 characters, so hopefully they can extend this to an even larger scale.
It's amazing to go back and look at Age of Ultron, which is a film I like, and it's so tenuous in attempting to hold on and give the characters everything that they need, and yet it's a much smaller cast, arguably, compared to Civil War, but Civil War does such a better job at it, even characters only appear in 2 or 3 scenes, because no second or line of dialogue is wasted. There's so much more care given to every moment and every character, where it doesn't feel like there's this balancing act, and one character doesn't get just one extra line more, then they fall off, and it's been completely useless.
Well, it's amazing because, like, every character is treated like they're the star of the movie without actually overshadowing the star of the movie.
Yeah, it's still Cap's movie through and through. It never feels like it's not, but all the characters get as much as they need.
Like Ant-Man becoming Giant Man, or all the moments where Falcon gets to take Red Wing around. Just everyone gets a great moment to shine.
Can we stop? Can we stop a moment and talk about the opening of this movie, where the Falcon releases his drone shaped like a falcon? You think, oh, it's like a falcon, it's got a red stripe, so that's their little nod to Red Wing. But then 5 seconds later, it's like, no, his name is Red Wing, and he's people. He is Sam Wilson's best friend. Just every character is given so much roundedness and so much stuff. Like, every character has a running joke. Every character has a specific reaction to certain events that gets played throughout the movie. It feels like they're all having fun with the large cast they had instead of being burdened by it, like we see in stuff. Yeah, like in other teen movies.
We haven't even covered Spider-Man, but that is a character who, the purpose of him in the movie is to show up and make people sticky so Iron Man can arrest them easier without hurting them.
To be fair, that's Spider-Man's role in any story, is to make things sticky and then leave.
Yes. So it's such a minor role. However, it's actually, the character is way more important in the story, and they justified him being there. He has that heart-to-heart kind of thing with Stark. It also illustrates his irresponsibility for bringing a child more or less into the battlefield who does get injured, not critically or anything. But he seems like he's a character who should be there instead of being a forced-on cameo, like, oh, we got Spider-Man, fucking toss him in. It's exciting. He's a great character. I want to see more of him. I'm really pumped for Spider-Man Homecoming now. And he just didn't feel like he was sticking out like a sore thumb. He felt like a character that should have been included.
It's kind of surreal to think, like, looking back on this movie, Spider-Man's role in this movie is he's a MacGuffin. He's the big MacGuffin of the movie, like, apart from Giant Man, of course, but Spider-Man was Tony's ultimate weapon, and he's brought in as a complete loyalist, like, to a fault to Tony Stark, because he's just this wide-eyed kid that recognizes the genius inventor of Tony Stark and doesn't really, look at all the other stuff, because
he's kind of blackmailed into the spot too by Tony.
Well, he is, but it's
Tony's really hot on him. It's not fair.
Oh, well, yeah, there's that, but you can tell that Peter would have done it regardless because, Tony Stark, this would be to a guy like Peter Parker, this would be like if you met Stephen Hawking or if you met Bill Gates and got to, like, have them mentor you throughout your, like, fledgling career at something you're really passionate about but really can't go to anyone else about. And it's interesting that they take the approach of Spider-Man is this really, really street-level hero to the point where he doesn't have a costume, really. He has, like, just sweats and marker drawings on them and these weird goggles that help explain one of the most innovative ideas of Spider-Man's powers that I've ever heard in any medium, even like comics. Like, Mike, you and I were talking about this a little bit whenever you saw the movie. Like, Spider-Man's powers get an upgrade.
Yeah, that was a fascinating little wrinkle they added to it. The whole idea of the lenses Spider-Man's always had, being there so he can focus because his spider senses are just overwhelming him whenever things are going on. And gives a nice reason for when Tony upgrades his costume that he gets Deadpool eyes.
That he can express himself.
I love Spider-Man's Deadpool eyes so much.
Spidey eyes.
The moment that Spider-Man looked up at Giant Man and his eyes went wide and he screamed, "Holy shit," I thought, well, I can die now. Comic books are real.
I love how Spider-Man, the beloved one of the biggest superheroes the world has ever known, Spider-Man. He's the big secret weapon for Iron Man. And in the end, it's Ant-Man who is the best secret weapon. Motherfucking Giant Man saves the day.
The glory of Giant Man.
He does, and yet he doesn't, because Spider-Man gets that amazing comeuppance moment where he gets to take down Giant Man in the most epic way imaginable and set him up for Iron Man and War Machine to trailer shot him into oblivion. Like,
I'm not arguing that Ant-Man gets knocked the fuck out. What I'm saying is all his goal was to distract those guys so Captain America could get away. Success.
Oh, yeah.
Ant-Man
I mean,
does it. It's a pure victory for him, but that's all I needed to do.
Nobody
Thank you,
wins
Paul
but Giant Man.
can we
Which
just
is
talk about
amazing
the
too,
fact
because
that
Giant Man, they took Ant-Man and made him an integral part of this movie. Like, if you had no Ant-Man, this just doesn't work.
God, the fact that they just, when everything seems bleak, is when they're about to go off and they're obviously about to fight and they're about to have this, like, huge climactic battle, all they have to do is turn to Sam Wilson and he says, "I'm a no guy." And then enter Paul Rudd, bringing in immediate comic relief that the movie just, like, right as it was starting to feel like it was losing its narrative, just a little bit, he comes back and he brings it forth back tenfold.
He walks out of a completely different movie to carry the tone of that movie into Civil War. And that's what I love so much with it's something that Avengers did excellently, and this movie does even better, which is whenever a character from a different movie comes into the story, they bring that tone with them. Like, every time Ant-Man is on screen, he's just being Ant-Man. He doesn't change to suit the movie. And I love that so much, because that's the point of bringing all these characters together. It's not just seeing these actors play off of each other, it's seeing all of those conflicting tones like commingle and to create something new.
And it's also interesting to see them establish tones that we haven't even seen yet, with like Black Panther having his own movie soon.
Yeah, Black Panther is just in the Black Panther movie every time we come.
And that movie looks exciting as all hell. Like, all they would have to do is show little snippets from Civil War as a trailer, and I'd be like, okay, sold.
And whenever
we'll
we
have
see
Claw. Are we getting Claw again? I want Claw.
And anytime we see Spider-Man, especially in the scene in Queens, it's just, we're in the Spider-Man movie for 5 minutes. And I just want to take a moment to talk about what a Herculean accomplishment this movie makes in making me and millions of other people who rolled their eyes out of Spider-Man getting another reboot fucking dead set to go see that movie. Because even though Spider-Man is my favorite superhero, I still had that little bit of like an internal groan whenever they got the rights and immediately announced they were going into production on a Spider-Man movie. It's like, ugh, it's good that Marvel has them now, but can Spider-Man go away for just a little while?
Yeah, just let him die.
Not let him die, Cody.
Well,
Let him die. String him out of his mouth.
he's pure evil. He should die. That would save the universe. That's what
Hail
Infinity
Hydra.
War is going to be about.
Look, we still got time now to save Gwen Stacy. She's only 16. We can make
I don't
this
know.
happen.
Going
Just
by
shoot
this
him in the
movie's
face.
logic, she might be like 40 or something. Who knows?
It is weird when you think that if Spider-Man died from that radiation, Gwen Stacy would still be alive today.
And become Spider-Gwen.
And her dad.
Yep, I was gonna say the Stacys would be so much better off.
Spider-Man has such a hit count when you really get down to it.
I mean, just kill him in Daredevil. That's all you have to do. Just kill him in Daredevil, and there will be peace in the Marvel Universe. I guarantee it.
That reminds me, just a bit of a side note. Whenever Iron Man said he knew of a guy in New York, I just immediately imagined him, like, going into Hell's Kitchen and walking into Matt Murdock's apartment during episode 2 of the last season. So Matt's just rolling around on the floor. Oh! Get out of here! Iron Man just fucking books it. And then he
Skedaddle,
queens.
scram!
God, if there's any
Spider
character you never want to walk in on, it's fucking Daredevil. He's always going to do something that's blackening your soul.
Okay, even better than that. What if you walked in on the scene where the ninjas are taking over the hospital, and Tony just like lowers his sunglasses, like, what the fuck?
No. Way better. That episode where Elektra's recovering dead and Stick is just there.
Eating an apple.
He just walks in, slowly backs out.
He's with Karen.
Like, Matt's shirtless. Elektra's dying in a bed, and there's an old blind man there.
Keep walking, rich man.
He just kind of shrugs and backs out.
I don't want in on this. I'm gonna go to a child's apartment.
But I love how they were able to somehow make Spider-Man, a character we're seeing for the 3rd time at this point, actually feel kind of fresh. And it's in so many little details, like, holy shit, like, this Spider-Man is actually really, really poor. He doesn't live in the suburbs in Forest Hills in a really nice house. He lives in a shitty apartment in Queens.
Well, that's the thing I love about this version of Spider-Man is what a reinvention it is, on top of being, yeah, they're going back to basics and making him an actual high schooler, and Tom Holland was actually, a teenager. But they're taking these little elements and twisting them to really make him a product of the MCU, as opposed to making the MCU, like, accommodate him.
Yeah.
It's so cool how they just, like, did this little, almost worldly version where he's more in tune to modern society. Like, he's the next Ultimate version. Like, he's the 2nd generation Ultimate version. And I love what they were able to do with him. And even doing something that the Mark Webb films really, really struggled with, which was getting across the message of Spider-Man without having to say, with great power comes great responsibility. Peter's little speech about why he does what he does immediately made him 1,000 times more of an accurate portrayal of Peter Parker's character than Mark Webb ever got to do in 2 movies.
And I love how that speech just, like, I love how they were able to fall ass backwards into Spider-Man being tonally relevant for the plot of this movie. Spider-Man's whole responsibility thing going into Tony's newfound responsibility.
Hey, he's not just in there because, oh, we have Spider-Man now.
And they even managed to make like the weird mentorship angle that actually came from the Civil War comics work, because unlike in the comic book where Peter's 30 and taking orders from Tony Stark,
From this dude he's known for 10 years.
This is actually an impressionable teenager, and it doesn't result in a weird red and gold costume. Like, that's actually how he gets the classic Spider-Man costume. Like, there's so many little cool twists that I gotta hand it to Marcus and McFeely. They knocked it out of the park with it.
Can someone explain to me, though, what was going on? The end credit scene where Spider-Man gets a hollow watch? Like,
That's the spider symbol.
That's the, you know how Spider-Man in the comics, like, he would have this belt buckle that would, like, shine, like, this light of his face? Like, it's a big nod to that.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I was missing something important as a setup. Like,
and it appears to be some kind of computer interface as well.
He has his own Jarvis. It's Uncle Ben.
Jesus Christ, Tony, no.
It's been stuck in my computer system for the last 20 years.
I'm in hell!
Cyber hell!
Kill me!
The only thing I found
Peter, your responsibility is to kill me!
The only thing I found weird about that after credit scene is that Peter's complaining about it being itchy. Just take it off, dude. Like, why are you just wearing it around your house?
Super glued it on me.
Why would he ever take it off? Also, I want to see a deleted scene where Tony gives him the costume, and it's just the Iron Spider. It's like, don't you like it?
I can't move.
Why does it only have three things?
Why does it look like an Iron Man costume? You're my sidekick. I'm gonna leave now, Mr. Tony.
No, I'll tell your aunt on you. Come back and love me.
What? Okay. There's this bucket of black paint here. Oh,
Okay.
it's hurt.
Jesus Christ!
I mean, it's in character.
It is, but holy shit, I did not expect Mike to take it to that level. Like, wow.
So, can we talk for a moment just about how they're somehow able to make the Peter Parker Aunt May relationship just feel like something from a modern story and not some weird 1950s thing? The way it's always kind of come across, even in the Raimi's movies.
While also making Aunt May really uncomfortably hot.
I still don't know how to feel about that.
I'm uncomfortable.
It's not cool.
Look, I am all for it. It's just, I'm gonna have to take some time to adjust. I do not, like, if she ever mentions the word wheat cakes, I'm just gonna have all sorts of thoughts, and it's gonna end badly.
I just love how Marcus and McFeely, they've taken it upon themselves to be the Greek chorus of the of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like, they made Senator Stern work. They've done all these band-aids to kind of fix the weird edges of this universe. So they are preemptively saying, yes, it's weird that Marissa Tomei is Aunt May. It's weird that Aunt May is hot. We have officially acknowledged that. Now we move on. Like, they just get out of the way before the Spider-Man movie even happens.
Also, she feels like a real aunt for the first time. She doesn't feel like a grandmother.
Yeah, she feels like, Peter's aunt. And there's such a small detail in here that I haven't really seen anybody else really bring up that I love so much, which is that Peter calls her May and not Aunt May like it's the 1940s. Like, I love their relationship so much. It's so organic. It feels like, like a kid who's being raised by his middle-aged aunt.
That's how I see all my parents. Like, hey, Papa Ron. Hey, Mom Lori.
Hello, Mother dear.
Mother. Hello.
Like,
Yes.
one of my favorite, aspects of the whole Peter Parker and Aunt May thing is just the fact that there's a line that Peter says, when he's explaining the fact that no one else knows that he's Spider-Man, and he's saying, she can't know, she would freak, and when she freaks out, I freak out. Like, you can see him almost going into a nervous breakdown there, and it was kind of, in a weird way, moving, because it's like, in such little time, you get a little window into the lives of the Parkers.
I like how they immediately went into why Aunt May cannot know Peter is Spider-Man. Just got it out of the way.
I love the great lengths they went to just establish that Pete is a really, really nice kid.
Yeah, he just likes to tinker with stuff. Like, he picks up a DVD player. He likes to do stuff like,
Stole that.
Spider-Man stole that guy's DVD player.
Also, I'm sorry. What is he doing with that old-ass computer?
That Commodore 64.
He's hacking the aliens from Independence. He's really
Look, he
saving us all.
is trying to acquire Prometheum X.
Man is a scientist.
I want to see Vincent D'Onofrio say that so bad.
Spider-Man is a scientist.
Say Vanessa.
Vanessa.
Why is he turning into a snake man?
That's what happens to the Kingpin in the comics, don't you read?
Comes Thulsa Doom.
But as far as the Marcus and McFeely Band-Aids go, I think my favorite has to be them knowing that Gwyneth Paltrow will probably not be in these movies anymore, and just running with it to make that Iron Man's character work.
And immediately going back on the ending of Iron Man 3. Like, hardcore.
Also, I even love how, I didn't even realize this until after seeing the movie a few days later, that they retroactively made that really awkward scene in Age of Ultron work, where Maria Hill asks where Jane and Pepper are, and Cap and Tony and Thor are like, oh, well, they're off doing other things. It's like, no, she just left him. Like, that's why that scene is awkward.
And honestly, like, I think it's for the better, because where was that relationship ever going to go? Like, it kind of reached this culmination with Iron Man 2 and 3. And really, Tony works better without that, I think. Like, he's just he works as his own entity.
Well, they kind of wrote themselves into a corner where they did all the things you could do with that relationship in those 3 movies.
Yeah.
Well, then they have an actress who they can't really bring back because she's insane.
There's that too.
At least they can chill her out for a while and just recast her later. Meanwhile, I guess they just decided that Jane Foster is also not worth it, even as a character.
To be fair, it's Jane Foster. Until she becomes Thor herself, like, I'm sorry, but no.
See, even the Jane Foster mention brought down the podcast. Because that is what Jane Foster does.
Sucked out all the
That's her
magic of this
power.
discussion.
Long live Sif.
Speaking of Iron Man and Band-Aids, I always said this before, I love how Marcus and McFeely's, again, their personal mission is to fix weird things in the Iron Man franchise. Like we saw with all the weird Senator Stern stuff in Iron Man 2, and essentially making the plot of Iron Man 2 kind of lead into the whole Civil War stuff. I like how this is other than maybe Avengers, this has been the only movie with Iron Man since the original that I feel understood what makes Iron Man work as a character. We see this very prevalently in the first Iron Man, which is all about Tony Stark realizing what a crappy human being he is, and gradually beginning the journey to becoming something more heroic, creating this, larger-than-life persona that he has no choice but to live up to, almost as a promise to himself. But we immediately lose that with Iron Man 2 and Iron Man 3 and Age of Ultron, where the plots of each of those movies is Tony is oblivious to the fact that he's a piece of shit and will just continue to be so forever. But we see so much in this movie from Tony's introduction onward of him being very, very aware of the fact that he's not a very good person and that he's failed on that promise he made himself. There's a great little bit of dialogue whenever he's talking about Stevie the dead child, where he mentions that...
Poor Stevie.
Where he mentions that he went abroad to help people for his summer abroad, and Tony would have just stayed at home and gotten drunk. Like, this is a Tony that's very self-aware of his flaws, and in this movie we see that his attempts at bettering himself, prove disastrous, because one of Tony's biggest character flaws is that nothing can ever just be about him. He has to drag everyone else down with him. Like MB said before, if he's going to be reined in, everyone must be reined in. And I feel like that's the only time Tony Stark ever really works as a character. Like, the mark of a great Iron Man story is whenever it acknowledges a very simple, hard truth about the character, which is Tony Stark is not a good person. He tries very, very hard to be a good person, but in the end, more often than not, that's just not going to work out because he doesn't have the character to back that up. And you can get a lot of drama and a lot of interesting stuff out of that. But when you have the character just sort of wallowing in the fact that he's a piece of shit and that's awesome, that's just boring. Like, one of the Band-Aids that really struck me, it's entirely possible this wasn't intentional, but I kind of think it might have been, which is the way they chose to play Iron Man and Spider-Man, as Iron Man essentially being a patron to an underprivileged youth, which is something Shane Black's Iron Man 3 just kind of rolls its eyes at. Iron Man meets an underprivileged youth and makes fun of him and calls him a pussy, and the movie rolls its eyes at that because Iron Man is too cool to hang out with a kid. But in Civil War, they just play that completely sincerely. But in Iron Man fashion, that ends up ending disastrously, because even when Tony tries to do something good, it has to be a little bit self-serving. And you see that the immediate aftermath of that, with Tony just immediately realizing, okay, this is a mistake, this kid needs to go home. I done goofed up now. And it's just cutting from that to just the scene of all of them in the raft. And Tony realizing that he's just betrayed all of his friends, and he's once again done the Iron Man thing. And that just breeding him to an emotional state that he just wants to repair everything whenever he's in that bunker, with the sudden realization that everything that's made him crappy and set him down this path comes, intentionally or not, from Bucky and his actions as Winter Soldier. Just seeing that bring him over the edge, and that for the finale of the movie essentially making him go full supervillain briefly, I feel that is really beautiful emotional continuity and emotional storytelling. And as much as Civil War feels like a perfect third act to Captain America's story, this also feels like a perfect third act for Tony's story. And I think I really appreciate that.
The thing I really appreciate that Marcus McFeely did with Tony is they took a little line from Iron Man 1 that was probably improv'd, of when Tony gets out of the cave and he's like doing the press conference and he sits down, he just briefly mentions to Stain that he never said goodbye to his father. And then they make an entire character arc out of that one throwaway line in Civil War. Like, that's Tony's introduction in this film, is reframing his own memory so he says goodbye to his father. And that drives his entire actions throughout his entire life. It reframes everything around that one, probably improv line on set that day, because that movie didn't have a script.
Also, I love how those two characters their two stories are united by Howard Stark. Like, that's actually kind of brilliant. Like,
Yeah.
that ends up bookending the series in an interesting way. It's the murder of Howard Stark that drives the Avengers apart. The man who made Captain America's shield.
Just to kind of tag up on that a little bit, all of that stuff is fantastically driven home by the fact that Robert Downey Jr. has never given a more multi-layered performance with Tony than he does in this film. I've never seen him put on so many different versions of Tony in the span of a single film. Like, he did all three Iron Man movies. He did the Avengers sequels. But with this one, he gets to do Tony at his best, Tony at his worst, Tony, like, trying to figure out what the right thing is, Tony admitting that he's wrong, Tony really goddamn angry when he figures out that Bucky killed his dad and he really wants revenge for that. Like, he gives it his all, and I was really shocked by the fact that this dude who we've taken for granted for so long as just being Iron Man, just literally embodying that character in a way that comics never felt like they really needed to do. Like, he manages to step it up and really deliver his A game in a way that I don't think I've really seen since Iron Man 1.
It's the first movie since Iron Man 1, and a little bit of 2, that gave Downey a thing to do, other than just stand around and be Tony Stark.
Which is strange, considering Age of Ultron.
That was the problem with Age of Ultron. It's kind of made up for it.
Like, it's a performance that doesn't get lost in the spectacle of who Tony Stark is, and it actually roots it in to what the story needs him to be, which I think is what sets this movie apart, is that all of these characters ultimately are servicing the story, and the story is servicing them, and this such a, like, great symbiosis of everything that the Marvel Universe has been building up to on film. For my money, like, it's just, honestly, Winter Soldier is probably still my favorite just because of how tightly woven it is. Because that is one thing about this film, is that it's not as nearly as tightly woven, because unfortunately they do have to deal with so much, and they do have to take a lot of things and kind of not give them their proper due. Like, even the Sokovia Accords and the conflict there itself, like, there's still some shaky foundation there, and still some stuff, like, with Zemo.
Well, Zemo, for as amazing as, what a breath of fresh air Zemo was as a villain in not only the Marvel movies, but comic book movies, and quite frankly, movies these days, that his storyline, as cool as it was, I loved cutting to the Zemo movie every once in a while. That just tonally is from just this strange espionage thriller. And you don't really know what's going on. And Brule's performance is so good, and the way Zemo's plot and who he is and why he's doing what he's doing ties so well into the plot and the themes of the film. It's just, if you kind of trace it backwards, nothing he does really makes that much sense to where it ends up. Like, it's a lot of movie logic.
They're pulling the reverse of the I need to get captured to get close to the hero. In this case, it's I need to capture the hero so I can get close to him. Which is crazy either way you do it.
Well, it's interesting that at the end he needed both Cap and Tony to follow him to that one base, but also to do that, because in his first introductory scene where he's interrogating the Hydra agent, he says specifically if this dude tells him what he needs to know, he doesn't have to do this other plan that he has that would involve a lot more blood. That guy doesn't do what he tells him to do, so he frames Bucky in Vienna and kills all those people, so he can draw Bucky out to get the information.
Including King T'Chaka.
I think T'Chaka died for nothing.
So, like T'Chaka. But if Zemo doesn't do that, doesn't frame Bucky, then I don't know. He would be doing all of his stuff in secret, which would not lead Cap and Tony to that base.
Hey, we don't know what his original plan would have been. He might have just gone up to Cap's door and like, hey, I want to show you this. Then, like, put a bag over his head. Then walked up to the event.
A tiny net.
Then walked up to Stark Tower, which is still totally in New York.
We just don't talk about it.
And just dropped Steve there. the videotape, like, glued to his chest. Watch this. I want to see this version of Civil War.
Well, there is a lot of glue with Zemo, so it makes sense.
He accidentally glues his balaclava to his face.
Oh! Just pausing for a quick second. I find it hilarious that we're just ignoring Stark Tower now. But the only reason there was an Avengers compound in Age of Ultron is because they were originally supposed to be like the new SHIELD. Like, they were training new agents and stuff. Like, I don't remember. I think they cut that out. I don't think you saw anybody training in the Avengers facility at the end of Age of Ultron.
No, they just showed him standing around in there. There was, the same crew we started this movie with.
But they did film people, like, people training in the compound, like recruits. Like, training like new SHIELD agents wearing versions of Quicksilver's outfit that he was wearing. I guess an ode to Quicksilver. And that's the whole reason there was a whole Avengers compound that was created. And not just Avengers Tower.
I assume they wanted to get their Avengers ship out of downtown New York.
They're not wanted anymore.
Probably, yeah. I mean, they keep causing, like, robot invasions and alien invasions. Like, maybe they should do that in the countryside. Also, I imagine property rates are way lower. Tony Stark's a billionaire, but, I mean, he didn't get to become a billionaire by being totally irresponsible with his money.
Yes, he did.
Well, I mean, he had a good trust fund.
We saw that Matt Murdock was able to purchase law office for relatively cheap due to the event.
You're saying they were colluding? This was all a Lex Luthor land grab on Tony Stark's part.
I knew it, Stark, you bastard.
I'm saying Matt Murdock pulled the strings from the beginning. Matt Murdock may have opened the portal for the Chitauri to come in. We don't know. It's within the realm of
son of a bitch.
He's too blind to do that.
He thought he was going into the men's room. Instead, he opened up the Chitauri portal. Oh, God, no.
Shucks, guys.
Well,
I imagine Matt Murdock is being very bumbling.
Because he is. He's blind. Blind people are bumbling.
But
He's
anyway.
got super blindness.
Sorry for all you blind people who can't hear this.
I have to speak up. I'm wearing a towel.
But yeah, that is one of those weird caveats of the MCU, is that you occasionally get things like Hydra being a big deal between movies, and and Cap leading the Avengers between movies.
look, we've only done 13 of these things. We don't have time to cover all that kind of bullshit.
So, seriously, the Avengers compound was a thing for Ant-Man.
It existed for that one scene from that movie.
And really, as far as Cap leading
Well, they had the
Avengers,
compound in this movie. I mean, the compound's still in use. Apparently it's just totally empty besides, 4 people.
Well, that's what's weird. It's like they moved into this gigantic compound that's 2 rooms and some of them.
They wanted to give Wanda a lot of space. She's weird.
It's even weirder, though, because when she knocks Vision through, the 50 sub-basements of this place, it's huge. They built a skyscraper that goes below ground and just put nobody in it.
Where do you think all the helicarriers went?
And all the corpses of the workers on the helicarriers? There had to be a lot of people operating those helicarriers. They killed a lot of people.
And yet, apparently, the compound is so small that Stan Lee can come up to the front door and deliver mail. And by the way, I'm suggesting that that's a reprisal of Willie Lumpkin.
Yeah,
it's not.
Tony Stank?
That's canon now.
Then Rhodey gets to laugh despite not being able to walk again.
God, Rhodey not being able to walk is the saddest thing I've ever seen in a comic book movie.
They'll have robo legs by the next one. Which is actually, if we can stop just totally loving the movie for a minute, if we want to play devil's advocate, some of the complaints I've seen against the film were kind of the fact that the Marvel movies operate kind of like Marvel comics. You introduce drama, and then you clear it up, and you make it seem like there's progress, but really the movies are just in a continual state of, just running their wheels and not actually moving.
Age of Ultron.
It seems like there should be character arcs, but they don't really matter in the next film. Or they'll have arcs that transcend over several films, so it's kind of like the idea of Bucky is, the whole Winter Soldier is a setup to Bucky, and then at the end they go, well, we're gonna find him in a later movie and we'll explore Bucky. And we get to this movie where it's a big chase scene, essentially for Bucky most of the time, where we don't even really get to know Bucky as a character all that much. We get a little bit of him, but he's still dealing with the brainwash thing. So he's kind of like a running MacGuffin for all the characters. And I can kind of see the point. And I don't know if it's necessarily bad. Marvel, if they wanted to, they could stuck with the first wave and just made everything like an origin story. So yeah, there's going to be a big arc for each character. But I don't mind them treating each movie more like an episode. These are all things that are going to keep building on each other, and maybe there's not an end point. There might never be a Vader tossing the Emperor down a mine shaft conclusion type moment to make it all seem like the build-up was worth it. But for right now, I'm enjoying the ride, and even if it does seem like the build-up's not necessarily going anywhere, the individual moments that it's supporting seem worthwhile.
It's about the journey, not the destination.
But I don't know if you guys see that at all in the movies. I don't know if you feel like these are really, each one's its own separate nice thing, like you could pick up Civil War and enjoy it by itself, or do you really need to watch all those other films and maybe get the small changes?
Well, I have 2 caveats to that. One, I would say that one of Civil War's strengths is that more so than any other Marvel movie, this seems to have actual stakes. That was a major fear I had going into it, that it was just going to end with Tony and Steve realizing that Zemo was setting them up, and that's all resolved, and they shake hands, and it's back to status quo. But the Marvel Universe gets kind of fucked up.
Well, we'll see. I mean, it's hinted at, but you also end up with Captain America giving a phone to Tony with his number on it, and all the other Avengers broken out. So they're still going to be doing their Avenger thing, minus,
Well, they're fugitives now.
Yeah.
Right, but there's probably a chance, if they wanted to in the next 10 minutes of the next movie, they could just wrap all that up or pretend it didn't happen and kind of hand wave it away. Kind of like Tony retiring at the end of 3. That's kind of a concern. There's the illusion of change.
Well, with Marcus McFeely and the Russos handling Infinity War, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously nothing definite yet. We don't know how it's going to play out. But there's that fear for me that, it is a lot of hand waving, or whatever we do in this movie, we can just retcon for the next one, because they have to play nice together. Which, yeah, that means they all build together, but it also takes away the importance of an individual film if its big conclusion could just kind of be rewritten by the next guy in line. Because we're not always going to have the Russos guiding continuity. By the time they're done with the Infinity War movies, that's 4 Marvel films in a row for them. They're probably going to want to try something else, I'd assume, and who knows what the next guys are capable of. Or if they'll even respect the vision presented in the previous films.
No one respects the Vision.
Nobody. I respect the Vision.
You would hope that things are cemented into stone a bit more. Especially with Marvel Studios having broken away from
Perlmutter.
Perlmutter. Ooh, Perlmutter's pretty much the entire reason Iron Man 2 has no real arc for Tony, necessarily.
Or why we never got a Black Widow movie.
There's that, too. So, hopefully then maybe some more stakes will be brought in. Who knows? I don't really blame Perlmutter for Age of Ultron's failings in that department.
But if we look at stakes even in this movie, sure, it seems like big stakes because everyone's fighting each other, but you do have characters calling each other out for pulling their punches during the big airport fight, and most of them don't even want to hurt the other ones. They're just looking for a way to kind of subdue them. And in the end, the biggest casualty is Rhodey essentially losing his legs, but we see him being rehabilitated in the film itself with him getting robot legs. So by the next one, they could have him with a complete robot set of legs where he's totally fine. It doesn't feel like a permanent loss. It doesn't feel like he's permanently disabled. And,
nobody is fine with robot legs, Cody.
That's true.
Legs seem pretty awesome.
You go to a veterans hospital and you ask those soldiers with their prosthetic legs if they're doing fine.
They don't have Tony Stark robot legs. Tony Stark robot legs would probably have like a bottle of vodka hidden inside of them and like jetpacks, and you'd have super strength to kick down doors.
You can fit vodka into a prosthetic leg, believe me.
Oh, interesting. But I'm just saying, the big Civil War comic story thing everyone knows about is Captain America gets shot down at the end. And this movie, we don't really have that same impact. I'm not saying it would have been right to kill Captain America during the end of this film, especially since we just brought him back pretty quickly anyways for Infinity War. But the movies are starting to feel a little safe. Like, you realize these are all franchise characters and building characters. So the only ones that really are likely to get knocked off are people you don't care about, like War Machine or Hawkeye, or, the little guys who maybe only have a couple of lines in between movies that won't get franchises.
Well, this kind of leads into the second caveat I had. And it leads into it eventually, but first...
We got a journey to take first.
I would say there's a very big difference between stakes and repercussions and just things like character deaths. Because I feel like more so than any superhero movie I can think of, Civil War is a story with emotional stakes. And for me, Tony Stark saying, "My father made that shield, you don't deserve it," and Cap leaving his shield there is just as devastating and destructive as a character death in another movie.
Arguably more so.
Yeah, and a reason for that is that at the end of the day, you can't ignore that Civil War is a movie connected to 11 other movies. And I don't consider that in any way a weakness. Civil War, more than any other film so far, has proven, to me at least, that the whole experiment of the shared movie universe can have amazing benefits once everything has reached a point where you've built the world up to play with stuff like this. Like, Civil War, without any build-up to it, would fall so limply and have so little effect. I mean, we saw this year with Dawn of Justice, with these characters we don't care about hating each other for no reason on their first meeting.
No, do not see.
But with all the baggage you're bringing to a movie like this, like, I feel like certain failings can be overlooked because at the end of the day, no, this isn't just a standalone movie. This is a sequel to 2 other Captain America movies, and in many ways, a sequel to every Marvel movie before it. And I think that at that point, a movie doesn't necessarily have to root its stakes entirely into those 2.5 hours. Like I said earlier, like, the stakes of this movie are the relationship between these 2 characters and the characters that orbit their respective universes. And some things are played safe. Like, there's the great moment between Black Widow and Hawkeye where they just kind of laugh at the fact that neither of them are particularly mad at each other and they'll still be friends tomorrow because this has just worked to them. But then you get stuff like, Vision crippled War Machine, Winter Soldier killed Tony Stark's parents. Like, those are things that, if these movies follow any respectable law of storytelling, are not going to go away. Those are things that are going to leave a thumbprint. And I think it just comes down to whether or not you have faith that this stuff is going to be followed through on. And like I said earlier, with the Russo brothers, and especially with Marcus and McFeely still writing both parts of Infinity War, I think There's going to be follow-through with all that.
I'm really tempted to just say, counterpoint, no, fuck you, Civil War! And then...
Then I punch you in the throat.
Oh, my perfect teeth.
Your throat teeth.
Ew, throat teeth?
Throat teeth. I chew everything. Twice.
That would be an amazing evolutionary trait.
I would be. Huh. I think we should leave viewers with that mental image and let them ponder what they would do if they had extra teeth growing along their esophagus. Because nothing says Civil War more than mutant teeth.
I'd eat carrots.
Raw?
Raw as the day you were born, Cody. Box Office Pulp was born with a second set of teeth at his throat. Box Office Pulp used to dance for nickels at Mr. Majimmy's Circus by the Sea.
Box Office Pulp is actually a goblin shark.
Oh.
And like that, he's gone.
What a shitty ending.
Didn't you love the beginning?
I hated the beginning, and then I grew to love it with time. It's kind of like how I feel about... Actually, no, that's not true. I don't really like babies after any amount of time.
Babies are pretty terrible.
Yeah,
Pretty much how I feel with this podcast.
Oh, God. And that's why we don't do it live.
Never do it live.
Never do it live. It's a fool's errand to ever do anything live.
Cody, I hate to break this to you, but we've always done it live.
What? No! I was actually going to use that as a segue into wrapping up the episode proper.
Podcast ended 20 minutes ago, Cody. We didn't even pimp any of the other shows, but fuck it.
I'm telling you, we just record that little bit and we just slap it on the ass end of every episode, regardless of if it fits or not.
I'll do it. I'll do it as an after credit scene.
Alrighty.
Do it.
Yeah. Oh, you want me to do it?
I'll do it. And you can check out Box Office Pulp and many other fine Pulp Podcast Network shows at pulppodcastnetwork.wordpress.com. Also, be sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and Stitcher. Check out the Facebook page for this and many other shows. And be sure to check out our 2 other monthly shows, Graphic Novelism and Below the Bible Belt. And also, the most recent addition to the Pulp Podcast Network, the Supergirl Power Hour. Now, put a fucking gun in my mouth, because I want to blow my fucking head off.
Take the frogs with you.
Hold on, pause there for a second. Okay.
This is Box Office Pulp Guy, and this has been a Pulp Podcast production. Now please, 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 put a gun in my mouth and pull the trigger and say goodnight.
And now, on with the show.
This meeting will come to order. The Legion of Pulp is now in session. In a moment, iTunes... Yes, Gizmotron.
I was wondering, Emperor Palpatine, if I could perhaps...
Box Office Pulp thinks we need a few items to pawn on the black market.
Box Office Pulp Guy, you have a podcast dedicated to movie analysis. Pinhead, your pleasure puzzles are deadly. Isaac, you've got corn.
Gone?
What more do you need?
How about a nuclear warhead?
What?
All other supervillains have them. With a nuclear warhead, I shall leave all other podcasts to tear themselves apart with paranoia.
Box Office Pulp wants a magic lasso to hang himself with.
Can I get a ship in a bottle kit
I demand more corn.
to make my own ship in a bottle?
Oh, enough of this. The hell do I look like, Santa Claus? We're wasting valuable time. Right now, my Pulp drones are rewriting Apple's code to make our podcast #1 on iTunes.
Excuse me, Emperor.
Gizmotron, what is it?
All Gizmotron wants is pants. A decent pair of pants.
Darth Vader wants pants too.
Order! Pain is not supposed to be this complicated.
Tune in next week at pulppodcastnetwork.wordpress.com.
I don't even know how I deal with any of you on a daily basis.